If we haven't met, my name is Austin, and I had the privilege of helping start Key City, mostly from behind the scenes as I was finishing my degree in theology out in Chicago. And then in May, I graduated. In June, I got married and moved back here, and I've been able to be a part of Key City more on a day-to-day level, including having the privilege to teach on Sundays like this. But there's an interesting thing that happens to me frequently, and that is, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but not knowing how to answer when someone asks you, what do you do for a living? And fortunately for me, at the moment, it's not because there isn't a thing, but because there's too many things. I tend to have my hand in one too many things at any given time. You see, I could answer that I'm involved here at Key City. I helped start it. I teach here from time to time and help with the leadership team, but seeing as we're all volunteers here, that wouldn't seem to quite answer the question that people are asking. But there's also two equally true things that I could say after that. You see, I could respond by saying I work my day job in public relations, but there's a second thing that while it equally pays our bills, it's not a title I've ever felt comfortable with. It's something that always felt a bit strange to me, and that is YouTuber. You see, a couple years ago, I began posting videos on YouTube, and what began as just a creative outlet, an opportunity to speak, work on my public speaking skills, work on my video editing, eventually turned into a job. And not only was it surprising that it turned into a job, but the niche I found myself in, really stumbled into unaware, was something I would have never expected. You see, one day, I was wondering, what kind of video am I going to make today? Because that was about the amount of thought that went into it, which is probably not a surprise why it hadn't grown at this point. And I said, I've always wanted to try to bring people together from different perspectives. And so maybe I'll make a video about my experience going to a Catholic Bible study. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with kind of all the nooks and crannies of the Christian tradition, the evangelical upbringing that I had with the bright lights, the big stages, the quasi-rock music setting is about as far as you could get from the Catholic Church. The church had a big breakup in the 16th century, and the families have kind of fought ever since. And I remember that morning when I came to that Catholic Bible study at 5:30 in the morning, wondering why on earth I had gotten up that early to start with, but also as I was in the parking lot and there were no lights shining except for one light shining on a statue of Mary, I thought, what have I gotten myself into? And then I posted that video expecting to get about the 10 views that I got on average on most of my videos, 2 of which were my mom, 1 was my grandmother, and the rest I think were just YouTube algorithm bots. And much to my surprise, it wasn't just the first video to cross 1,000 views, but then soon 10,000, 50,000, 70,000. It kept growing. I found myself being invited on podcasts, and soon my channel had found a niche that I hadn't expected. I began exploring the Christian tradition. Soon I was attending masses where instead of big bands and loud music, there was incense burning. And there were all of these things that I didn't know, like when am I supposed to kneel? When am I supposed to stand? What am I supposed to say? What am I not supposed to say? I found myself at Orthodox services, interviewing priests, nuns, monks, staying at a monastery, going all throughout the Christian tradition. And what surprised me most in this journey was not the fact that the services looked different, but the impact they were having on certain people. You see, in the tradition I grew up in, the word ritual, which these services were full of, was a word that was always preceded by empty. See, anything that you would do ritualistically was something to be suspicious of. It was something to be wary of, something to be nervous about, because rituals were always empty. They were the opposite of authenticity. And that just hasn't just shown up in the church, but in our Western culture, which has been shaped by kind of the Protestant movement, we have stripped ourselves of nearly all of our rituals, such that we say that to do something repeatedly in this way must mean that it's not real, which is why I was so surprised that while for some, these rituals were certainly empty, for others, they were deeply meaningful. But not only that, what I wanted to get to the bottom of was why was it that for some, they were so meaningful and also helping them become the type of people they wanted to be. You see, I had thought that if these people were growing in their faith or growing into the people they wanted to become, it would be in spite of these rituals. But as I talked to person after person after person who was experiencing life transformation in these settings, they were pointing back to the very things that I would have thought would get in the way of our potential, these rituals. Then as I began expanding out, looking into the science on this and looking into the conversations in larger culture, I found that actually we're discovering something powerful about ritual. And maybe, I started to think, maybe, just maybe, that in these rituals that we had shirked off religiously and these rituals that we had shirked off culturally, maybe we were missing something. And so over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be going through a series called Ritual Rebrand, where it is my goal that whether you carry the same kind of evangelical baggage that I carried, or we simply carry that collective growing up in the West suspicious of rituals, we might rebrand them to experience them not just as something religiously, but something that might actually propel us towards the people that we want to become. Now, you see, here at Key City, I recognize that we come to things from a multiplicity of viewpoints. And in fact, we don't see that as a defect, but we see that as something that we have acquired by design and that we celebrate. We rejoice in the fact that people come here from so many different perspectives and will leave here taking the very same ideas we've given and push those into all different avenues with all different spins on them. But in light of that, we do find, because we have so many different perspectives, it's helpful for us to at least define our terms so that we all are recognizing we're talking about the same thing, even if we go and interpret it differently. So I want to place ritual within its broader context. And here at Key City, we'll talk way more about this in the future, but we essentially believe that life change happens in 3 primary areas. There is our worldview, how we see the world, our complex interlocking beliefs about reality. There are our relationships, how we show up in our relationships, who we're in relationship with, and how we prioritize them. And then there's a third category, which we're going to be zeroing in on in this series, and that is our habits or our disciplines, those things we do repeatedly. And ritual finds itself in this category, but we're going to double click on that idea and kind of, so if habits are all the things that we do repeatedly, think of, say, tying your shoes. You probably tie your shoes daily. This is a habit, but it's not quite a discipline. You see, for us, a discipline is a habit that you leverage for the purpose of life change. So while tying your shoes every day probably isn't a discipline, maybe working out because you want to be someone that is fit, that's something that you value, that would be a discipline. But ritual is a further layer yet. You see, ritual, it's a layer that we place on top of our disciplines to seal our disciplines, to cement them, but to also add an extra layer of meaning. Perhaps an analogy or an illustration will help. Imagine that you walk your dog every day. Now, you could do this completely absent-mindedly, simply out of the need to walk your dog because you think it's something I got to do, I do it, I'm not present when I do it, I just do it. That would be a habit, right? But let's say you decide that actually something that I really value is getting outside. I know it's good for me, and I want to be the kind of person that goes outside and enjoys it and is present to nature. So instead of just walking your dog absent-mindedly, now you're going out, you're walking your dog, but you're saying, hey, I am doing this because I want to be the kind of person that gets outside, the person that gets outside, gets that exercise, and enjoys the natural world. All of a sudden, you've taken a habit and turned it into a discipline. But if we wanted to add meaning to that, if we wanted to solidify that, if we wanted it to become something that really propelled you on the path to where you want to become, that is where ritual could come in. So let's imagine we took that same walk every day. But now, and I know this might sound crazy, I'm not telling you to do this if you walk your dog, but just imagine with me that when you get outside, the first thing you did is you plucked just one blade of grass. You took a nice deep breath, and you said, man, am I grateful to live in a world where I'm surrounded by such beauty every day that I don't want to miss it. And you proceeded to walk your dog. You see, you would just have taken that discipline, but put an extra layer of finish on it. A ritual that would not only cement the discipline, but would add meaning to it. You see, there are essentially 3 elements to a ritual. They are attention, intention, and repetition. And we just saw that there in that idea of a ritual of walking your dog. You had the attention of taking that deep breath, becoming aware of what you're doing, being present to that moment. But then you added the intention. You said, I want to be the kind of person that values being outside. So you told yourself Man, am I grateful to live in a world where I'm surrounded by such beauty every day. And well, by doing it every day, you would add your layer of repetition. If you wanted to visualize these three things, I want you to think of a water hose. And I imagine many of you will have had this experience, that you can take a water hose and the continual flow of water through it would be your repetition. But then imagine that you put your thumb over the top of that hose. What is it going to do? It's going to seal most of it off and allow it to focus it so that it comes out faster. That is the power of being aware. That is the power of bringing your attention to what you're doing. But then your intention would be aiming that hose, whether that's at a friend or a plant or whatever you want to use your hose for in this situation. But that is what rituals do. They bring our attention, our intention, and repetition. And you see, they have two primary functions. They, one, solidify our disciplines. If they were a sword, they would be double-edged. We could take them to the things that we already care about and say, I want to seal this value of mine. I want to seal this discipline. That is what a ritual will do. And the second thing, though, is it brings meaning to the mundane. See, today, we have such issues with both of these things, and I think they're intimately connected. You see, as I said at the beginning, this isn't just a religious matter. This isn't just a matter of me solving that curiosity of why is it that for some people they could go into a church and when they make the sign of the cross, it meant nothing to them. But when someone else did it, they were seeping that ritual and meaning where it's actually making them the person they wanted to become. I think it's those three elements, and it's doing these two things, but it's bigger than that. It's in all of our life. You see, psychologists talk about what they call a crisis of meaning that we're experiencing. We see deaths of despair on the rise, and we see people increasingly saying that I feel this vacuum of meaning in my life. I feel aimless. I feel as though I lack rootedness in my life. And maybe, just maybe, if we had these two things to deliver, we could experience more of that. There was a fascinating study by a woman named Tatjana Schell. She's a Norwegian academic, and she began studying people doing pilgrimages, of all things. Pilgrimage in the 21st century in Spain, a completely postmodern, post-Christian context. And she wanted to know, why is it that people are doing the Camino de Santiago in hordes? And not only are they experiencing this old, ancient Christian ritual, but it's actually working for them. Why would that be? And she talked to these people, asking them, why are you going on the Camino de Santiago? You're not even religious. They would say that I feel as though I'm searching for meaning. I'm searching for direction. And the amazing thing was that they were finding it in this age-old ritual. As they hiked this path of pilgrimage, and as they were going through the ritual motions, they felt connected. They felt a sense of meaning, and it was taking them in the direction that they wanted to go in life. You see, what that got me curious about was if it's working there, and if it's working in all these contexts, and we can kind of put through what it is that's in a ritual, maybe, just maybe, the way I had thought about ritual in Scripture was off. You see, I had often grown up thinking that the Old Testament, that first big 2/3 of your Bible, was full of these obscure rituals. And why was God doing this? Why was he having them do stuff with lambs and sheep and corn? And why on earth would you do this? It all felt arbitrary. Was God just really into burning stuff on altars? Was God just really into the smell of burning sheep? Maybe. Or maybe these rituals were things that are for us. See, I want to take us to the book of Exodus, chapter 12. And it is one of the most famous rituals in Scripture, the Passover Ritual. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the context here, God had raised up Abraham. He had told him, hey, I'm going to make a nation out of you. It felt like it was the most improbable thing, but yet it had happened. His descendants were becoming numerous, but then they found themselves under the thumb of the Egyptian empire. Their backs would have been lacerated from the whips. They would have stood hunched from bending over each and every day. Their skin would have been sun-baked from being out in the heat each and every day in the Egyptian weather. And they had cried out for years for God to deliver them. And on the eve of their deliverance, of all things, God calls for a ritual. You see, they're about to go from being slaves to being free. And God says, yep. But hold up. I've got some really important instructions for you. We're going to create a little ritual here. They were probably we got things to do. We got to pack. God's like, hold on. One thing real quick. And so this is God speaking to Moses, who had been raised up as the leader of the Egyptians, a man who struggled in speech, was the most unlikely of leaders, just like God, to pick him. And we have this starting in verse 3. It says, tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons. According to what each can eat, you shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male, a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month. The whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. Which, to me, just sounds odd, right? We're talking, you have to pick a lamb, pick one without blemish. It has to be exactly this year old. And he makes this, he says, by the way, we're going to make this the first month of the year now. I know you had a calendar, just forget that calendar. We're going to reorient your whole calendar around this moment. But what he's doing in this ritual is, one, by giving all of these fine details, which I really don't think God's concern is about whether the lamb has a spot or whether it's a year and a day old or just under a year, but he's calling them to attention. See, with this amount of specificity, you cannot engage in this ritual without being keenly aware of each and everything that you're doing. And by reorienting their calendar, he is saying, now your year is going to be marked by this moment when I brought you from bondage into freedom. You are going to orient your time. You are going to mark this moment. It will not be the same as the others. From now on, you will recognize that the year starts with my definitive action. It goes on. Then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat it, which I just want to pause there. Not because I particularly enjoy this. I'm actually a vegan. None of this appeals to me. But just bear with me for 1 second. Imagine you killed a lamb at twilight. It's dark out at this point. And now you've decided to paint, which sounds like a great combination. And you're painting in blood. Imagine the smell of this. Imagine the blood dripping from the doorpost. If not for just keeping yourself from gagging, you could not help but be aware of what you're doing. Your attention is going to be drawn in by embodying this ritual, by painting with blood, smelling that blood, seeing it on your doorpost, which would probably make many of us in our Pinterest-inspired houses cry. Luckily, I'm not going to ask you to do this after this. But it goes on. They shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. They shall eat it. Again, I don't think the actual concern is in their culinary approach. But by calling to this level of specificity, they can't help but be aware. It keeps going. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted, its head with its legs, its inner parts. And you shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. In this manner you shall eat it with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, your staff in your hand. You shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. You see, what's being done here is not only are they being aware by picking out the lamb and painting, but he's even setting the context. You're going to eat this in haste. You're going to eat this fully packed at midnight for the next day because I am calling you to be a people that is ready for what I am about to do next. Just a little bit more. We're going to go on to Moses explaining this to the Israelites. He says to them, you shall observe this rite as a statute for you and for your sons forever. When you come to the land that the Lord will give you, as he has promised, you shall keep this service. When your children say to you, what do you mean by this service? You shall say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover. For he passed over the houses of the people of Israel in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians, but spared our houses. The people bowed their heads and worshiped. You see, now, not only do we have the attention, but we now have the intention. And going forward, if you were in a traditional Jewish household today, this wasn't just like a suggestion when your children ask, but each year, the children ask this question specifically, verbatim, and there is a verbatim answer. Why? To set the intention of the ritual. Now, I recognize this is weird. And I invite us all, when we read the Old Testament, we read the Bible at all, to recognize this is kind of odd, and that is entirely okay. In fact, I think the Bible is a weird book, and that's the part of what makes it so exciting at times. But I want to put ourselves in God's shoes if we be so bold. God is setting out here that they might remember what he has done, that they might orient their year around it. Now, I want you to think about all the times you've tried to remember something or tried to value something. An example that comes to mind for me is that each year, without fail, when I get together with my cousins like that 1 or 2 times a year around the holidays, I go, man, I should get together with them more. It's a great intention, and maybe you have that same experience. You say, I should really do this. And then you see them again 1 year later when you haven't done it. At least that's what happens for me, because for all of my good intentions, for my thought of, I'll just do this organically, it'll be free-flowing, it'll be authentic, it doesn't happen. So imagine God could say, I want my people to be the kind of people that remember that they have been brought into freedom, and when they get where they're going, they remember where they came from. They remember that I am the type of God that takes care of them. He could leave it at that and say, like, you guys just remember that, okay? Like, you remember that however you want to remember it, you just do that. Or he could set a ritual, strange as it was, where each year they would have to embody, they would have to work through the idea that God passed through their doorway, that God had them ready in haste to leave the next morning, that they could reorient their calendar to say that it begins with freedom. It begins with the decisive act of God. And they could do it by even asking the question and giving the prescribed answer each time. Or they could just wing it. And I'm guessing that this worked better. And I'm guessing that if I took the same approach to my cousins, if I said, actually, instead of us all saying with our best intentions we're going to get together more, what if we made a ritual where each month we got together, we made the same meals, we asked each other the same questions to know how each other are doing, and we began to engage in each other in that way? I almost guarantee you it would be more effective than my best intentions and my best desires to get together with them more. So that's what I want to invite you into today. Each week of our series when we teach here at Key City, we want to give you all a micro practice, something to put into action in the coming week so that you can take what we've talked about and propel that into your life to experience change. Because we're actually not about giving you good ideas here. We're actually about giving you things that will propel you towards change, which is why this topic is interesting to me in the first place. It's not just a matter of taking something that was a curiosity of mine as I found myself in odd situations, but it's actually about saying, if there is the equivalent to a moving walkway in the airport, how can I walk on that instead of walking around it? Because I don't know about you, but when I want change in my life, I want to find the moving walkway. And when we find those things, we want to share them with you. And so there's 2 interesting ways that you could come about this. One, you could take the things that you are already doing, those habits, those big picture things, and bring them into a discipline and layer it on with ritual to cement that. So you could take whatever that is. Maybe you already have some type of thing that you're doing. Maybe it's exercise. Maybe you wake up and you do some type of scripture reading or you pray. But you've struggled to really cement that. Identify the thing you're doing and do a little DIY ritual. The amazing thing is we were often taught that rituals were like these inflexible things that we just have to bend to. But I'm giving you permission right now. You can make it up. You can do whatever you want. You just take those 3 elements of attention, intention, and repetition, whether that's changing it from walking your dog to something that helps you be the type of person that is present to the beauty of the natural world, or whether it's taking your exercise and having a ritual that helps you get into that perspective, or it's taking your scripture reading, saying, this isn't just something I'm going to do and show up each day and kind of just flip it open and go like, what am I going to read today? And that one, and okay, that was all right. But actually instantiate something that has that structure and form that will help you take that next step. Or you can go in the opposite direction. You can, instead of taking something you're already doing, you can take a desire you have, a value you have in your life, and again, DIY ritual out of it. I'll give you an example. When Eliza and I got married, something that we said was so important to us is we really wanted to make sure we were taking time to connect. My love language is quality time, and I knew that with both of us having our hands in multiple things, that wouldn't come too easily. But one thing we identified is we wanted to eat dinner together as much as we could, and we wanted to be present while we were doing that. So instead of just making it something that we did, we said, this is something we want to do, zooming it into a discipline for the purpose of connecting with one another. And we could have kept it at that, and it probably would have been okay. But then we said, this is going to be a little weird, but what if we created our own ritual to make this time we have meaningful and to make sure it's a discipline we actually keep? And so each day, most days, we come together to that table, we grab hands, we take a deep breath to bring our attention to where we are, and we say, and I guarantee you, when we started this, it was weird. Rituals are weird, but they work. We said, I am here with you. Because that is what we want it to be. We want it to be a time to connect. And then we'd provide two things that we were grateful for. One thing we're grateful for in the other person, and one thing we're grateful for about our day. And I'll tell you, like I said, kind of weird at first. The first time you find yourself taking a deep breath, engaging in a practice you're not used to, it will be uncomfortable. And that's the point. We grow in things that are uncomfortable. But what that does for us each day is rather than saying, like, it'd be good to eat together and I should be grateful for Eliza and she's amazing, I bet, though, if I didn't have a ritual to do it, as worthy of gratitude as she is, she'd get less of it because it's not baked into my day that way. But by creating a ritual, we create context for the change that we want in our life. So I don't know what it looks like for you. Maybe for you, it's something like, I want to be a person that values family, like that idea of connecting with my cousins. Or maybe it's, I want to be a person that, you know what, this season of my life, I want to be present with my kids. Or I really want to be the kind of person that values movement and getting active. And instead of just setting that intention, create a ritual to cement it. I'm not here to tell you what it is. I'm not here to tell you which ritual to pick, but I'm inviting you to use this as a context for transformation. And like I said, the beauty is you get to make it up. And then when these things go on, they evolve and they change. And you see, each week here at Key City, we engage in a ritual of our own that you might not realize underwent a major rebrand 2,000 years ago. See, this very ritual we were looking at, the Passover Ritual, had been in effect for thousands of years when Jesus came on the scene. And he was eating that very meal with his disciples, which had all types of structure and form and meaning to it. There's multiple glasses of wine, each with a meaning, which we're lacking here in terms of the number of glasses. But they'd have each elements of food, questions you would ask. And it's in the middle of this meal that Jesus changes the ritual. You see, he says, this ritual that they were partaking in, the Lord's Supper, says, take this cup, it is my blood poured out for you. And take this bread, it is my body broken for you. At which point, the disciples would have said, whoa, 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 you don't get to change this ritual. But you see, when rituals are passed through people, they become traditions. And traditions aren't old and dead things, but they're as alive as the people partaking in them. And Jesus said, actually, we are going to keep this a ritual, but we're going to change the intention. We're going to keep our thumb over that hose, but we were going to change the aim. Rather than looking back at what God had done, he was focusing them on what God was about to do. He was going to show them that just as all the rituals were the idea that these weren't things for God, but things were for us, he was about to show us that God was supremely for us by giving his very life on the cross. And what better thing to help these disciples remember it than instantiating it with a ritual. Just as in the craziness of about to liberate millions of people from Egypt, a logistical nightmare, I have to imagine, Jesus has a million things on his mind, namely, I'm going to die tomorrow. He says, what this calls for right now is a ritual. Because it is through the ritual that they will experience this meaning and they will solidify their disciplines. They will live with the intention of being the type of people that recognize that we live in light of a God who is so for us that he died for us. And you see, that's what we're going to partake in now. Each week here at Key City, we invite ourselves into this. And you might notice, and maybe hopefully now, I hope now your senses will be ready for ritual wherever it shows up, that we bring three things to this. Of course, we bring the repetition by doing it every week, But there are two other things. There's the idea of bringing your attention to it, which is why each week we bring music when we get to this point. Not because it just makes it sound cool, but because it focuses our attention on what we're doing. And then you might notice that each week when you come down and the person hands you the juice and the bread, they say, remember, God is for you. Because we're setting our intention. Turning this from something that we emptily do each week to something that is full of meaning. Because it's our hope that rituals aren't just the form, but they are the thing that take our postmodern life, which is often so colored in gray, and brings it into a vibrant technicolor. That when we see that there is meaning in things as little as drinking juice and eating bread, that maybe the world around us isn't such a blank canvas of meaninglessness, but is something in which we can find the color of meaning and purpose all around us. So in just a moment, I'm going to invite the people to come down to partake in this ritual, which we have done for thousands of years in the church, and now we get to enter into this stream of tradition.